The HOA thought they had won. Their lawyer smirked, confident that I had no way out. The judge was ready to rule against me. But then, my lawyer stood up, pulled out a single document, and within seconds, the entire courtroom fell silent. The HOA president's face turned pale. They had made one critical mistake, and it was about to cost them everything. Buying my dream home should have been a joyful moment, but I had no idea that HOA politics would turn it into a living nightmare. It started small, random warnings about minor violations, absurd fines for things that did not even make sense. I ignored them at first, assuming it was just routine bureaucracy. But then, the letters became more aggressive. Threats of legal action, demands for payments I did not owe, and sudden rules that seemed made up just for me. The HOA board acted like a power-hungry dictatorship, controlling everything with their ridiculous regulations. I tried pushing back, questioning their decisions, but that only made things worse. One morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a summons to court. The HOA was officially suing me. My stomach dropped as I read the document. They had built a case against me, claiming I was violating community laws, being a disturbance, and refusing to comply. It was absurd, but I knew this was serious. The HOA had resources, lawyers, and influence, and if I lost, I would be forced to sell my home and leave. The worst part? They thought I had no chance of winning. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom, facing a team of HOA attorneys dressed in sharp suits, smirking with confidence. Their case was built on lies and manipulation. They presented forged documents, fake complaints from neighbors, and exaggerated claims about me being a problematic homeowner. The judge listened as their attorney made it sound like I had been willfully ignoring rules, harassing board members, and causing trouble in the community. None of it was true, but their arguments were convincing. As I sat there, I felt rage boiling inside me. How could they get away with this? How could they lie so openly, knowing I was innocent? I wanted to stand up and shout, but I knew that reacting emotionally would only play into their hands. Instead, I waited. I had evidence of my own, and I was about to expose their corruption. The HOA thought they had backed me into a corner, that I had no way out, but they had underestimated me. Just as their attorney finished his speech, my lawyer stood up and pulled out a thick file of documents. The HOA attorney rolled his eyes, expecting another weak defense. But then my lawyer placed a signed contract on the judge's desk. It was a legal loophole they had overlooked, a clause buried deep in the HOA-owned bylaws. As my lawyer read it aloud, the courtroom fell silent. The HOA had made a massive legal error. Their claims were invalid because the rules they were enforcing had already expired. They had no legal standing to fine me, no right to take me to court. Worse, their intimidation tactics were borderline fraud. The judge's expression changed as he realized what was happening. The HOA attorney flipped through his papers, suddenly panicked. The board members sitting behind him whispered urgently, their faces turning pale. They had walked into their own trap. Then the judge spoke. A case dismissed. The words echoed through the room. Just like that, the HOA case collapsed. But I was not done yet. I had one final move to make, and it would leave them wishing they had never messed with me. From the moment I moved in, the HOA seemed determined to make my life miserable. At first, it was minor complaints. My lawn was too tall. My trash bins were not aligned properly. Ridiculous things that barely made sense. But then, out of nowhere, they hit me with a major violation. A letter arrived stating I had broken a critical HOA rule and was now facing severe fines. Confused, I looked through the community handbook, trying to find the rule they claimed I had broken. But it was nowhere to be found. I contacted the HOA office, demanding an explanation. The board members dodged my questions, speaking in circles, insisting that all homeowners must follow the guidelines. When I asked to see the exact rule, they suddenly became defensive. It is an unwritten policy, one of them said dismissively. Unwritten? Said dismissively. Unwritten? How can you enforce a rule that does not even exist? That is when I realized the truth. They were making it up as they went along. They were targeting me because they wanted me gone. Maybe I had moved into the wrong neighborhood. Maybe I had refused to bow down to their petty demands. Whatever the reason, they were willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate the system to force me out. But I was not going to let them win. A week later, I received a final notice from the HOA. Not only were they standing by their false accusation, but they were also slapping me with a massive fine over $10,000. It was an outrageous amount, completely unjustified. And if I did not pay within 30 days, they threatened to take me to court and place a lien on my property. At this point, I was beyond frustrated. I knew I had done nothing wrong. This was not just about money, it was about power and control. The HOA wanted to show me that they were in charge, and I was just another homeowner who had to obey. But instead of backing down, I decided to fight back. I started gathering evidence, emails, letters, phone call records, even videos of other homeowners violating actual rules without any punishment. The more I dug, the more corruption I uncovered. It was clear, this was not just about me. The HOA had been running these scams for years. But before I could make my move, they took things even further. A formal lawsuit was filed against me. Now, it was not just fines. I was being dragged into a full-blown legal battle, and the HOA. They were confident they would crush me. The day of the court hearing, I walked into the courtroom and saw the smug, overconfident HOA attorney already waiting for me. He barely even looked at me, too busy chatting with the board members as they laughed quietly among themselves. To them, I was just another helpless homeowner about to be steamrolled. When the case started, the HOA lawyer stood up first. He spoke with absolute certainty, painting me as an irresponsible rule breaker who had refused to comply with the clearly stated community guidelines. He waved a stack of papers, pretending they were proof of my violations. The judge listened carefully, nodding occasionally. The lawyer smirked. He thought he had already won. Then it was my turn. I stood up, took a deep breath, and dropped a bombshell. Your Honor, the rule I am accused of violating does not exist. The courtroom fell silent. The judge frowned. The HOA lawyer stopped smirking. He quickly flipped through his documents, stuttering as he tried to come up with a response. But there was nothing to say. Matt, he had no proof, no legitimate case. The tension in the room shifted. The HOA members who had been so confident just moments ago now looked nervous. And as I pulled out my final piece of evidence, I knew I had them trapped. The courtroom was packed. The courtroom was packed. The HOA board members sat together, whispering and smirking, confident that their lawyer would crush me within minutes. Their attorney, a man in an expensive suit with an arrogant smirk, stood up and made a show of flipping through his paperwork, shaking his head in fake disappointment. Your Honor, he began, his voice dripping with fake politeness. This is a clear-cut case of a homeowner refusing to follow the rules. My clients, the respected members of the HOA, have done everything by the book. They have given multiple warnings, provided plenty of time for compliance, and yet we are still here today. He turned towards me, tilting his head as if addressing a child who did not understand the rules. Frankly, this is a waste of the court's time. The judge nodded slightly, taking notes. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me. The HOA lawyer had played this game before. He was calm, calculated, and completely sure of himself. He thought I was just another homeowner who would crack under pressure. I stayed silent, keeping my face unreadable. Let him have his moment, I thought, because what was coming next, he would never see it coming. When their lawyer finished, my attorney stood up slowly, adjusting his tie. Unlike the HOA lawyer, he did not rush or speak with arrogance. Instead, he remained calm, controlled, like a man holding a winning hand. Your Honor, he began. Before we continue, I would like to direct the court's attention to a specific clause in the state's Homeowners Association Act. He pulled out a thick document and flipped to a marked page. The judge leaned forward, interested. The HOA lawyer raised an eyebrow, but I caught a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. This particular law, my lawyer continued, states that no homeowners association can create or enforce a rule that is not explicitly written in their governing documents. If they do, any fines or legal actions based on such a rule are invalid and unenforceable. The judge looked up, his expression sharpening. The entire courtroom went silent. For the first time, the HOA descended. He shifted uncomfortably, quickly rifling through his paperwork. The board members whispered among themselves, their smug smiles disappearing. My lawyer took a step closer. Your Honor, I ask this. If the HOA cannot provide written proof that the rule my client allegedly broke even exists, then what exactly are we doing here today? Boom! Just like that, the foundation of their entire case shattered. The judge leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. He glanced at the HOA lawyer, who was now flipping through papers at lightning speed, desperate to find something, anything, to save himself. "Oh, Mr. Carter," the judge finally said, addressing the HOA lawyer. "Lawyer, is this true? Is this rule not listed in the HOA official guidelines?" The lawyer cleared his throat, stalling for time. "Well, Your Honor, the spirit of the rule is clearly understood within the community," and the judge cut him off. "Yes or no?" A long pause. Then, in a voice much quieter than before, the lawyer muttered, "No, Your Honor." A ripple of whispers spread across the courtroom. The HOA board members looked at each other, their faces pale. They had walked into court so confident, so sure that they would win. But now, they sat there exposed, powerless, and on the verge of losing everything. The judge shook his head, clearly unimpressed. Then he turned directly to the HOA board members. His face was no longer neutral. There was disapproval, even anger in his eyes. "Gentlemen," he said, "I hope you realize what this means." And with that, the entire case took a turn they never expected. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. The HOA lawyer's lawyer sank into his chair, flipping through his notes as if he could somehow undo the damage. The board members, who had walked in with their usual smug arrogance, were now fidgeting, whispering, avoiding eye contact with the judge. And then my lawyer dropped the bombshell. "Oh, Your Honor," he continued, flipping to another document, "this is not just about one made-up rule. The HOA has a long history of illegal fines, shady financial practices, and outright fraud." He pulled out a stack of evidence, emails, financial reports, even complaints from other homeowners who had been pressured into paying bogus fines. "This HOA has been breaking the law for years," he said, his voice calm but firm. "They have enforced rules that do not exist, fined homeowners for violations they never committed, and even misused community funds." The board members froze. The judge leaned forward, scanning the documents. His face darkened as he flipped through the pages. The more he read, the angrier he became. One of the HOA board members shot up from his seat. This is absurd," he stammered. "These are just misunderstandings. The judge raised a hand. Sit down." The board member immediately shut his mouth and dropped back into his chair. The entire courtroom had shifted. What started as a simple legal dispute had now turned into something much, much bigger. My lawyer stepped forward, flipping through document after document, laying out a pattern of corruption so blatant that even the HOA lawyer stopped trying to argue. "The financial records," my lawyer continued, holding up a sheet of paper, "show tens of thousands of dollars in HOA fees unaccounted for. Where did that money go?" Silence. "The fines issued over the past 3 years?" He held up another paper, full. More than half of them were based on rules that were never written down. More silence. The emails between board members. He set down the final document. "Here, they joke about targeting certain homeowners, increasing fees just to force people out. They even admit to rigging elections to keep themselves in power." The entire courtroom stopped breathing. One of the board members, a man in a gray suit, was now visibly sweating. Another woman who had been glaring at me earlier was now looking at her hands, her face red with embarrassment. Their lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. The judge turned to the HOA board, his voice cold and sharp. "Would any of you like to explain this?" Who spoke? The entire courtroom sat in a stunned, suffocating silence. The judge exhaled, rubbing his temples. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he slammed his gavel down. "Enough," he said, his voice firm and final. He turned to me. "Sir, based on the evidence presented, it is clear that you have been unfairly targeted. Any fines issued against you are hereby null and void." I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. But then, the judge turned to the HOA board. "As for you," he continued, his glare piercing through them, "and this court cannot ignore the level of misconduct and fraud exposed today. The board members tent. We am ordering a full audit of this HOA finances and practices," the judge declared. "Furthermore, I am personally recommending that this case be escalated for further legal action, including potential criminal charges." One of the board members gasped. Another buried his face in his hands. "Your abuse of power ends today," the judge said. A court adjourned. With one final slam of the gavel, it was over. The HOA board had walked in thinking they would crush me, but instead, they had been completely exposed. As I stepped out of the courtroom, I could hear the whispers, the shocked gasps, the frantic murmuring among the board members. They had never expected to lose this badly, but justice had been served. I had walked into that courtroom expecting a fight, but I never imagined. One of the HOA board members shot up from his chair. "This is insane. We do not have that kind of money." The judge turned to him, eyes cold. "Oh, then perhaps you should have considered that before engaging in fraudulent activities." The board member collapsed back into his seat, stunned. I turned my head slowly toward the HOA lawyer. His face, once cocky and condescending, had drained of all color. His fingers clutched the edges of his paperwork, but there was nothing he could do. It was over. The judge had made his decision. There would be no appeals, no loopholes, no second chances. I watched as the HOA lawyer shuffled through his notes frantically, as if searching for a last-minute argument. His eyes darted to the board members, hoping someone would give him an answer. But there was nothing left to say. One board member buried her face in her hands. Another sat completely still, staring blankly ahead, as if reality had not hit him yet. This was not the outcome they had planned. They had expected me to fold under pressure, to give in, pay the fines, and walk away defeated. Instead, they were now the ones losing everything. I could hear whispers around the courtroom. Other homeowners who had attended the hearing were murmuring among themselves, some exchanging satisfied smirks. They had all suffered under the HOA reign of power, but now, justice was finally being served. As the judge's final ruling echoed through the courtroom, the shockwave was instant. Gasps, murmurs, even a few quiet cheers rippled through the audience. One elderly woman in the back, who I recognized as a fellow homeowner, clapped a hand over her mouth in disbelief. "Bitter-sensei," but a man near the door muttered, "About time someone took them down." The board members were shell-shocked. Their lawyer, still gripping his notes, finally slumped back in his chair as if reality had crushed him all at once. The judge gathered his papers, stood up, and with one final slam of the gavel, declared, "A court is adjourned." And just like that, it was over. I turned to my lawyer, who gave me a small nod. "That," he said quietly, "is how you fight back." The HOA board sat there, too stunned to move. One of the members, an older man with gray hair, muttered something under his breath before storming out of the courtroom. Another sat frozen, staring at the table in front of her. I took one last look at them before walking out. Same people who had tried to ruin me, intimidate me, and bully me into submission were now paying the price for their own actions. Outside the courthouse, the fresh air hit me like a wave of relief. I was free, and they were finished. For years, the HOA had ruled over our neighborhood like kings on a throne. They imposed unfair rules, outrageous fines, and bullied anyone who dared to question them. They thought they were untouchable. But today, they lost everything. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight of months, maybe even years, of stress finally lifted off my shoulders. I had fought back, and I had won. The HOA board, once so arrogant and overconfident, now sat inside completely destroyed. Their lawyer had disappeared into the crowd, too ashamed to face anyone. It was poetic justice. They had dragged me into a legal battle, thinking I would cower and surrender. Instead, they had walked straight into their own downfall. And the best part? They had no one to blame but themselves. By the time I reached my neighborhood, the news had already spread like wildfire. Neighbors I had barely spoken to before were now coming up to me, shaking my hand, clapping me on the back. "You actually did it?" One man asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I smiled. "I did." A woman down the street laughed out loud. "Who serves them right? They have been terrorizing us for years." And then, something unexpected happened. People started cheering. It was not loud or over the top, but it was real. They were not just happy for me. They were relieved, because my fight had set a precedent. The HOA had always acted like they were invincible, but now everyone knew the truth. They were just bullies hiding behind a title. And today, the bully had been defeated. The HOA had learned something that day, something they would never forget. They were not above the law. They were not immune to consequences. And most importantly, they had messed with the wrong person. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board crumbled. Some members resigned in disgrace. Others tried to save face, but it was too late. The homeowners, once afraid to speak out, now demanded change. New rules were put in place. New people were elected, and the abuse of power the HOA once held was completely shattered. As for me, I went back to living my life free from their harassment. Battle had been long. It had been exhausting. But in the end, justice was served, and they would never, ever forget it.